We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us.
Joining me on the phone right now is James Follett, if I've corrected the name or pronounced the name correctly.
Yep.
James Follett's profession is within the energy industry, and for the past 10 years he has been employed by a renewable energy company. His formal role has been as a business analyst with expertise in the design, creation and management of business risk models, specifically related to finance, portfolio and trading. He studied natural sciences at Cambridge University and then worked as a neuroscience researcher at the Free University of Berlin. He has worked in various financial companies in London and now Sydney since 1995 as a financial modeler and IT developer. Well, what a mouthful. James, glad to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us here at the Irish side of the moon.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to your listeners.
We are having hailstones right now. Fantastic.
Oh, we haven't seen those for a while.
Good Lord. Well, hey, listen, we're talking about climate review, right? James, when did you get into the issue of climate change, climate perceptions, and what has been sold to the public right now?
Well, I think, along with probably quite a few people out there, I was a bit ambivalent to the whole thing for a long time. You sort of heard it in the background and didn't really mean very much. I mean, it was possible that it was just a sort of generic anti-sort of industrial sort of concept of we're turning out too much CO2. But because of the scientists and because emissions trading was actually going to become a reality, so emissions trading, of course, means a phenomenal change in economic structure and taxation of the country. And I work for a green company, which I can't disclose because though they know I have made this movie, it's not their point of view, so I can't be officially associated with the company that I work for. But for this company, I said, look, well, I'm a scientist. I may not be a physical scientist, more on the biological side, even though I've done chemistry and maths at university as well. But I'll look into this whole global warming thing because we are going to make a huge amount of money out of the green phenomenon, being a green company. And so can I look into it and see if it's, if it's plausible or not. Mm-hmm. So I was totally, from an independent standpoint, I had no predisposition for either way. And I just started doing my research, and this was about 2007. So it's a good 3 years ago, and it only took me a matter of weeks before I was thinking, wait a second, I haven't actually, to this point, seen a valid and plausible and believable bit of evidence that actually agrees with this whole concept of anthropogenic or man-made.
Okay, you know something, James? Sorry, I'm going to cut across and I'm going to play least case scenario for the listener. Pretend that I have been living under a rock for the last 30 years and I'm a first-time listener to Irish Side of the Moon. Can you put forward the proposed agenda of the climate change that is supposedly being caused by man? Put forward their case, their figures, their statistics, the research that they're using to prop up their case, and the proposed remedy first.
Well, it's actually quite a hard one because there really isn't much of a case. The large majority of the so-called evidence is based around using computer simulations, and they have this slight flaw in the plan that carbon dioxide is an input, and is actually into the model. They say carbon dioxide makes an effect. It goes into the model says, oh, carbon dioxide has an effect. And that's sort of a circular argument, which pretty much all of the simulation models that they're doing, which is the major propping stone for the whole of their argument, has that flaw. And it's well documented by all the climatologists in the world. They did point it out to, their compatriots. You can't use these computer simulations because, you're doing a cyclical argument. One of the big famous bits of so-called evidence, which was tangible, was the hockey stick. So the hockey stick was a graph of temperature over time for the last, I think it was 1,300 years. Different forms of the hockey stick were available, but last 1,300 years, they're saying, we pretty much had a low, flat temperature and consistent for 1,300 years until suddenly, 100 years ago, which coincided with the Industrial Revolution, it went haywire. So that's the tip of the hockey stick. So it's a straight and then flat, and then up into the sky, basically. And this hockey stick evidence was done by Michael Mann on Bristol Cobalt Pines. So he used a temperature proxy, which is, because we didn't have thermometers 1,500 years ago, you have to sort of look to somewhere in biology or in physics to give a proxy to temperature. And they used Bristol Cobalt Pines. And he said, well, the tree ring growth, dendrochronology, the width of the tree ring state, that, it's gone crazy in the last 100 years. Unfortunately, this evidence was based on one temperature site, 12 trees, possibly one tree, and his own proxy, which is based on the most dubious statistics imaginable, which people like Steve McIntyre have shown, and there's this ClimateGate thing that people might have heard of over Christmas, which really shown the whole thing to be a load of bunkum. The proxy ended with a sort of an upward a climb from the turn of the century to about the 60s, and then started dropping again. So that's where there's a phrase called high the decline, because actually even the proxy doesn't even fit the recent instrumental, which means thermometer-based temperature readings. So there's one big graph called the hockey stick, and that's been really disproven and ripped apart because they use two data series and they splice it together, which you can't do in statistics. And really what they're left with is very, very little. There is really very little evidence that they can actually say that CO2 is driving climatic changes. There is some sort of correlation that because temperature has been going up over the last 100 years and we've been producing more and more CO2, there's somehow, okay, there's a correlation. But if you actually look at pretty much the most believable and generally accepted temperature series, the temperature, this is a really important fact for the listener, the temperature has been rising for 300 years, and there is tons and tons of evidence, and even the IPCC in 1990 agreed with this. The temperature has been rising for 300 years. Industrialization has been really only the last 50 years of any significance, or maybe 150 if you really want to push it.
And for anyone who doesn't know who the IPCC is?
Okay, so the IPCC are the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're a UN body that were set up, and the so-called thousands of top scientists, as they say in their press releases, really it's based around 53 co-workers who peer review each other. And they are the people who really are the champions of this philosophy of CO2-based global warming.
Okay, so the story that is being sold is dubious, as you say, using dubious statistics, aren't they all? So
True.
For their case, for the man-made global warming, or the I'm lost for words here.
Yes, photogenic or
yeah. I'll settle for that right now. So, what are they saying that? How are we directly contributing?
Well, the idea is, if you want to talk about what is actually happening in a physical sense, is
what are they selling?
Well, they're selling man is bad because we're producing CO2 and we should stop industrialization. That's what they're selling. And they're saying that because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which it is, it can do all this. But the way that there is no physical evidence to say the mechanism how CO2, which is really a relatively minor greenhouse gas, can somehow have this massive temperature effect. There is a complete disjunct between what CO2 is known to do in the atmosphere and what they're claiming it can do. There is no evidence whatsoever backing them in physics to say what is correct, unless you believe in some sort of thing called the positive feedback. So their whole system is, okay, CO2 has an effect, and if you double CO2, so let's say we're at 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere at the moment. That's our benchmark, roughly. Now, if we went to 800, which would take maybe 100 years at our current rate to go. So this is a long time frame. If we actually doubled the CO2, the only known effect to the atmosphere would be an increase by 1 degree centigrade, which is not a problem whatsoever. And that is the only verifiable thing about the whole CO2 argument. The rest of it, where they're saying it could be 2-3 degrees within 30 years, which is so-called catastrophic, is really based on spurious, unjustifiable science.
Okay, so in a nutshell, the sellers of this idea is saying that the CO2 emissions that are being caused directly by humankind is going to cause a catastrophic, catastrophe on planet Earth, and something needs to be done. Now, that's something that needs to be done. What is the remedy that they are putting forward?
Well, exactly. That's what they're saying is catastrophic. And of course, the listeners might find interesting to know that warming, by the way, and the warming that we're having at the moment is actually phenomenally beneficial to us. So the warming we are having right now is keeping people alive, is making the planet more fertile. So if cooling is actually what we should be worrying about. So the concept of warming is good, by the way. I shouldn't be fearing the warming. And there is warming. People all agree there is warming. And it has been for 300 years since pre-industrialization. So what we're on at the moment is not catastrophic. It's actually on a very nice, gentle upward trend. The worry is actually that it's going to revert to a downward trend quite soon, which is what a lot of scientists are actually thinking is going to happen. It's nothing to do with CO2, but everything to do with the sun, funnily enough, and the energy from the sun and the oceans. So, yeah.
Okay.
So the catastrophic, well, what do they want to do is, I guess the question is...
Yeah, what's the remedy? What are they proposing?
Well, the proposal is that, well, if CO2 is evil, the only way we can, stop the whole problem is to have a bit of, sacrificing of our goodies in life, lead to more of a religious practice, I guess, of sustainable environmentalism, and basically we just have to cut back on our industrialization. We're just, or somehow turn our energy requirements from a carbon-based, society, which unfortunately it is impossible at our current state of play. Maybe in 100 or 200 years time, everything will be done by cold fusion, and we won't need carbon as a fuel anymore. But at the moment, carbon is our fuel, and by burning fossil fuels, we are actually keeping people alive. Industrialization equates to better standard of living, equates to less people starving and dying of disease on a grand scale. So burning the fossil fuels is good, as far as I'm concerned, but the adherents of the CO2 problem say we have to stop creating CO2. So if by doing that, we're actually going to kill people, and that's not really a bold step. It is the case. So by not allowing Africa to use its cheap and plentiful supplies of coal to develop, we are killing Africans, and they are starving because they haven't got what we have in the West is a cheap and extremely reliable source of energy.
I'm going to have to jump in here. That's a massive assumption. I know that you're a modeler, but to say that by not allowing the Africans to burn a cheap and plentiful supply of coal that is causing their deaths, explain that
absolutely
directly.
Yeah, I pretty much firmly believe that. Cheap energy is the foundation of modern society. I mean, you look where we were. Well,
again,
industrialization
pops into my head. A cheap energy supply in Africa, which there's an abundance of sun, would be solar power, but I could be wrong. Anyway, continue.
Okay, well, here's one little bit of evidence I put together, which for my movie, which comes from my sort of background in energy production. And I used primarily the International Energy Agency's figures. I compiled from their data a slide which I think sums it up very well. And basically, there's something called the long-run marginal cost. So this is basically the cost of having a power station, including the cost of actually creating it in the first place. It's not just, how much does your fuel cost? It's like the whole setup. And with nuclear power, it includes decommissioning it, which is obviously quite an expensive cost for
It is,
nuclear power.
yeah.
So if I give you an example of why we need to stick with the carbon and the fossil fuels, this will be the reason. So long-run marginal cost would be for coal power stations in somewhere like Australia. All of these things are different, of course. There's always variables, okay, but this is sort of benchmarks. $30 per megawatt hour, okay? Now, nuclear power would be $50 per megawatt hour, or if in countries that don't know how to do it properly, maybe up to 70. You could run gas, and you can burn gas, which is a real shame just to burn it for energy. It's much more useful things to do with gas. But if you wanted to burn gas in a combined cycle, which is the most efficient gas type of power station, it's around the $70 mark. You want to have wind power, and if you put your turbines on the windiest coasts, where you're guaranteed a capacity factor, which means a run rate of about 30, 40%. So 30, 40% of the time it's working at a high rate. You're at 120, so that's the best that wind can do. That's 4 times more than coal. And if you want to talk about solar, solar is totally votes for politicians. Solar is massively inefficient, very expensive at $250 per megawatt hour. So, and then we have to remember the final two, the renewable sources of wind and sun are, and this is extremely important, this is so important, you don't realize it unless you're in the industry, they are unreliable, and reliability is crucial for network stability. They cannot work as a baseload source of energy.
Okay, and you're deriving these figures directly from where?
Well, I compile those figures from the International Energy Agency, and they promote renewables. They promote all forms of energy, actually. They promote nuclear or coal and renewables. They're also, so they're not like particularly biased. And I also quote these figures from the fact that I work in the industry and we make power stations, so we do case studies in very, very large depth. So I work with some of the best economists I can think of, and they come from all over the world and they work with us. So I'm coming from a pretty good standpoint of what these figures are roughly.
Okay, now talk to me about the taxation on carbon emissions to the end user, i.e. us.
Yeah, I think some economists will claim that cap-and-trade scheme is not a tax, but as far as I'm concerned, any time when you're taking money from the people and redistributing, that's called a tax. So there are 2 forms of scheme whereby they want to convince us that if we put a cost on carbon dioxide, that we will therefore have an incentive to not create as much carbon dioxide, i.e. use less energy. Personally, I think using energy is great, but they want us to use less energy. And there's 2 schemes. There's the carbon tax, and there's the cap and trade. A carbon tax is sort of a flat rate applied whenever you run your car. They will calculate that you've gone from A to B, and that you would have created roughly so many emissions, and they're going to charge you for that. So they'll put that charge into the fuel price, and so there's a blanket flat rate of taxation across the board, and they have to somehow convert your emissions into a cost of how much a cost. So they have to somehow calculate that, which is obviously not easy. The other way, which is generally by economists seen as better, is to actually give a tradable and changeable value. So instead of putting a flat rate, and that's the cap and trade. So the government says we will cap our emissions to a certain level, let's say 20% lower than 10 years ago. So there's an overall quota for the country. And then they say for different industries, whether it be the energy industry or the cars, or it could be the distribution, for your shopping center, the truckers, or they all get given a quota. Now, if you use less than your quota, you can sell that excess into a market to people who want to use more than the quota because they think that, let's say, running their trucks hard, they get more profit from the fact that they're running the trucks hard and are willing to take a hit by having to buy it more than their quota. So what it means is it becomes an exchangeable commodity, and people say that because it's an exchangeable commodity, it tends to a lower level. So that's what cap and trade is, and that's what they're proposing. But either way you look at it, they are massive taxes, and one study I heard was saying that just in America alone, it would be $300 billion per year, which is more than they forked up to pay for the boys to go to World War II.
That sounds completely insane.
It is kind of crazy. I'm relatively partisan now I'm in my beliefs, but I've tried to really hold off, and I'm still willing, if someone could come up with some evidence saying there's a real need for this, then I would be firmly behind the concept that we need to do this. But as far as I've seen, and I've done quite a lot of research now in the last 3 years, and I keep up on it quite a lot, and I have a lot of people who I work with as well who are concerned with it because we're going to make a lot of money out of emissions trading. So it's quite a hotly discussed topic among us. And I just haven't had any evidence to convince me otherwise so far.
You're listening to The Irish Side of the Moon. You can hear our new episodes every Monday on radiomedia.org and irishsideofthemoon.blogspot.com. You can also download episodes from iTunes, Stitcher, and many other sites. You can follow us on Twitter, you can join our Facebook group, and if you're already in the group, don't forget to invite your friends. If you have any ideas for future guests on the show, send an email to shane@theirishsideofthemoon.ie. We are Irish Side of the Moon. Freedom of information, personal empowerment.
We've interviewed recently a couple of different people on, one of them was climate change, and more recently I was talking with a gentleman in the States, Peter Lindemann.
Michael Kaufman, his name? Or?
Michael Kaufman was the climate change guy, and then Lindemann were talking about energy, free energy and conservation. And he brought up many points about how wind power can actually be made more efficient, hugely more efficient, and the solid state devices that can, they're not solar, but they act in radiant heat, very efficient and continuous. Now, either way, there's two camps here with the whole climate change. Now, I was thinking about this when I was lying in my bed this morning. Climate change occurs regardless. Take the human beings off the planet. Climate change is going to occur. And in fact,
that's right.
All over the solar system, the planets are experiencing climate change. Mars is experiencing global warming. Two of the other planets have experienced polar shifts. There may be some hyperdimensional mathematics coming into play, I don't know. But anyway, it's not an isolated incident here on planet Earth to the exclusion of all the other planets.
That's right.
So, to put up an argument that, okay, climate change is directly an effect of man's CO2 emissions, and then tax the emissions whilst not changing the method of creating the energy in the first place, to just analyze that's insane. If you really think, if you're in that camp and you think, okay, CO2 emissions, man-made, are creating some sort of problem, if you really want to change that, then you change the energy production systems. It's simple. The political will, you just do it. You make it happen. If you truly are concerned as a politician, Al Gore et al. Now, on the other side, if you believe that CO2 emissions are, number one, good, because they provide the abundant input for plants and fauna, so that they
Which
can
they
grow.
do.
Yeah. So they can.
They provided, they've boosted the global crop yields by 15% since the 50s, so it's pretty good.
Okay. So, but that's beside the GM. We'll not get into that. So there's two camps, and again, if anything, it's causing derision and disharmony amongst people. And it's what I can see is, if you're not one, then you're the other. It's the old divide and conquer thing, used over and over and over again. Is there any credence to that from your own perspective?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's always been a huge idea of consensus, and if you're not in the group, you're a quack. You know, you're just your ideas are whack. So there has been no debate, and that's why I made the movie, because And I tried to make the movie on a grander scale, and I have got friends who have some clout in the film industry and all that, but I couldn't, convince people that it was a valid idea, so I had to do it as a one-man, man in his shed type movie. But I still think I'm very happy with the way I'm projecting the content, which is the evidence at the end of the day, just maybe a bit slicker. But there is billions and billions of dollars. They'd say $50 billion have been invested in trying to prove that CO2 is evil, and they still haven't done it. None of that money is really going to the other side. So if you want funding as a professor, for instance, and it's so pervasive that I actually think it's damaging scientific development, because if you say, I want to study the beetles in the New Forest of England, and I think that they're dying out because there's less trees, you say, yeah, well, I won't really get funding for that. But you say, I think the beetles in the New Forest are dying out because of global warming destroying their habitat. Like, there you go, you got your funding. So what the problem is that the focus of science is being totally biased and in this preconception and predefinition that there is global warming, and that's changing everything in science. So it's very dangerous. So you can't actually have a proper balanced argument. That's why the balanced argument is occurring, like on the other side of the moon or on the internet, where people have almost, truly free speech. But for instance, I can give you an example here. Like, Tony Abbott was voted in. In Australia here. He's our opposition minister. He was voted in, and he actually pushed out, in quite a confrontational battle, his predecessor, because Tony Abbott said, we have to have a debate about climate change since we're going to bring in this phenomenal emissions trading tax. And both sides of the party going, okay. So there was no debate, because both sides of the House were saying, okay, we'll have it. It's like, wait a second, this is going to cripple the world economy. That's a bold step, but if you look at the figures, we are talking crippling the world economy, and we're not even having a debate. So Tony Abbott came in truly 100% on that mandate, no question. Now, once he came in, he's been virtually silent ever since. So somehow people have got to him, and he has decided, for whether it's some sort of secret lobbying or whatever, he came on a mandate and he shuts up. So there is no debate.
Good
Still no debate.
Good for him. Just sell out. Huh? Listen, in your movie Church of Global Warming, and guys, the website is climatereview.net. The trailer, the presentation, and the movie are all there for your viewing pleasure. In that, they speak about the CO2 lag versus the heat. So there's a differential there, and it's actually inverse to what has been sort of sold. So do you want to speak about that?
Yep.
Talking about facts.
Well, that's a good point. So, okay, there was one other. I forgot that one while I was talking. There's one. I was waffling on. There's one other bit of evidence that's been really pushed. So there's the hockey stick. There's the computer models, which are non-transparent and shown by ClimateGate to actually have fraudulent code in. And the last bit of evidence, which is the Al Gore evidence, which is the 600,000 years of temperature. So they used ice cores, which is not a very accurate way of doing things, but that's pretty much one of the best ways we can do to sort of say, well, ice cores have trapped air bubbles, through time, and those air bubbles we can look at CO2 and temperature. So it's a bit of a loose proxy, but that's what we have. Anyway, he showed the graph in his movie, and this is the pièce de résistance. He had a 20-meter long visual projection and, funky and all that. And he says, look at this. Here's temperature, here's CO2. And they go up and down, like a sine wave, cyclical. And then he goes, look at right now. And the CO2 goes through the roof, and so does so-called the temperature. Well, the only problem is, and this is universally, I would say 99% of scientists on either side of the fence would agree, is if you actually look at the data, that CO2 does not go in front of the temperature, which means CO2 would be driving the temperature. It actually lags by 800 years. So is it cause and effect? No, CO2 is actually caused by the temperature. And you know what? It's actually very easily explainable from even a high school kid water has a dynamic equilibrium with CO2. So CO2 in the air will dissolve in water at an equilibrium point, and this equilibrium point changes with temperature. As water warms up, more CO2 is released from the water. So the whole mechanism is very, very understandable and is very well known. Temperature on the planet is changing, and as it changes, the oceans contain less or more CO2. So it's the big sump of CO2 on this planet. By far, many magnifold times over anything else, more than plants or anything else, is the ocean. So it's all well known and well explained, and that was the other piece of evidence which has been shown to also be a bit bunk.
Yeah, I found it very interesting that it was a complete reversal, the relationship to what was being again presented repeatedly in the media. Just hypnosis, keep it going, keep repeating it, and everybody's going to believe it.
Absolutely. Well, I believed it at the time. I thought, okay, Al Gore seems like a reasonable, nice guy, and he's telling me this. It's only a little bit later, a year later, that I looked into it and went, oh, wait a second.
And again, I've experienced this, what I'm about to speak about, I've experienced, and the guys here in the team, there has been so much disinformation. I'm going to rephrase that. Our politicians have been duplicitous to the point of wholesale barefaced lies in many different arenas for such a long time that there is actually no trust. I certainly wouldn't trust them further than I could throw them. And trying to take that responsibility back and say, well, do we really need these external so-called forces, authorities to deem what is appropriate for our lives, or are we adults? Can we decide for ourselves? But anyway, what I'm getting to is the amount of distrust in and around the media and the politicians and the corporations, and it's really got to the stage where people don't really trust anything that's out there right now unless it can be seen and felt in front of them.
Yep.
From your own point of view, putting a movie out such as this, what are you hoping to achieve?
Well, when I started researching it, and I had to spend a long time, most of the information is in the form of blogs, and therefore it's quite hard. Unless you're on top of the topic and understand straight away what's going on, it's actually quite hard to understand. So I thought, well, this could be something I can do, and this is what I did initially for my company. And then once I realized that I was onto something quite an interesting idea, I decided to make it more amenable and actually make it a publicly available movie, which is to try to put forward all of the evidence, bring it all together, because it is so disparate and so varied, and the story is very difficult to understand. I'm just trying to condense it and act as a journalist, basically, and just condense it into a palatable form. That was the goal. And because it has been done a little bit, and there's been a few other movies which are quite good, but I felt there was a need for it out there. So I just thought there was a bit of a niche that could be filled. So that's what I tried to do.
Okay, so let's create a scenario. Your movie, Church of Global Warming, along with the work of Lord Monckton and David Icke and whatever, let's put a whole list of people that through that combined effort, the proposed carbon emission taxation is halted. How does that impact your company that you can't mention?
Well, yeah, Lord Monckton's seen as the high priest denialist. I actually saw him when he came here to Sydney.
What would you say? The high priest denialist? Who is that?
Lord Monckton. He's pretty much the most vocal champion going around the world and getting on to people like Glenn Beck, who is one of the few mainstream commentators who's showing a bit of cynicism and quite rightful cynicism, but on Fox Network, and is actually getting a big audience and all that. And Lord Monckton and he are often talking about things. So he's one of the few people who's managed to, because he's got clout and because he was one of Maggie Thatcher's aides and all that, and he's a political old dog and he's got contacts. He's actually, having a big effect, whereas one thing is obviously very small scale, but it's trying to do my part as well. The effect for our company is huge, but we don't. For us, it's all benefit because we're a green company. We're not going to be taxed. It's our competitors who get taxed. So for us, it's only upside, and that's all that I've been saying to my colleagues. Look, okay, you know, you want a big, fat, juicy bonus. Well, you know, we want CPRS. We want emissions trading, but if you want to also at the same time cripple your overall lifestyle because the economy is taking a dive with this massive taxation, then, well, is it really worth it? I mean, there's a bit of a personal gain, but overall, everyone's going to be pretty much losing. So it's not a good thing to have. And we are a green company, so we're only going to gain for it. So other companies, which are the base loaders, which is what society, Western society, in most countries relies on, which is coal, they are all going to be, you know, a real shot in the arm. The idea is to try to make coal unviable and to make sources like wind viable. So that means wind at $120 a megawatt hour has got to be equivalent to $30 a megawatt hour. So that's a sort of massive taxation, quite phenomenal. The rises that will be required. So it's going to hit everybody.
Good time to talk about solar activity and its effects.
There was so there was one sunspot here on Wednesday, and it's disappeared again. So we're at the bottom of solar cycle. So the sun in general, people say that the total solar irradiance, the actual sort of output of the sun, is relatively stable, surprisingly. What does vary is that because it is a big, massive ball of nuclear fusion, there's a lot of magnetism going on, funnily enough. And through the magnetism, the sun can shoot out flares, solar flares, or like big sort of, looks like a volcano basically of gases, of burning gas comes out. And that's a solar flare, which can appear as a dark spot, which somewhat ironically is actually the dark spot appears to the human eye. And these create solar storms, and these solar storms interplay with our atmosphere. And now the mechanisms of how they interplay in the atmosphere would be, you'll need a few more radio shows. But needless to say, there is extremely large amounts of evidence, unlike anthropogenic global warming, there's extremely large amounts of evidence to show that solar flares has a very major effect on climate. And the latest evidence these days, I mean, really the latest, people are starting to swing. Well, at the end of the day, I mean, that is what is keeping our planet warm, is the sun. But people are actually starting to swing more and more emphasis to the oceans. Now, the oceans are so massive, of course, and very little surface area. So there's actually relatively little, let's say, surface exchange with the atmosphere of the ocean. There is plenty to surface exchange, but if you compare it to the whole energy sump, the actual sort of energy contained within the oceans, you can take, as they say, it has a memory. So you can take up to 600-700 years for one bit of water to go through the whole cycle of the oceans and come up the other end again. And so the oceans contains a lot of energy, and as the oscillations, so like the El Nino and La Nina, which people talk about, are just basically when cold bits or warm bits of the ocean come to the surface. And when they do, they can warm up the tropics in the Pacific or cool it and have big knock-on effects around the globe. And so really it's the sun is the primary driving force, but what modulates and really makes the difference and probably is really what's on a shorter time scale of influencing us is the interplay of the oceans with the atmosphere.
Okay. And are you still there?
Yep, I'm here. Yeah. So the sunspot has an effect, and it's the cycle of the oceans, and the interplay of the two is really what is the two drivers behind the global temperature.
And have you gone into, let's say, the longer cycles of solar activity that have been recorded, and possibly the Mayans who have taken all this into account many years ago, predicted a lot of the activity that we are experiencing right now. And I think there's a lot of scientists are predicting, more diligent ones, massive solar flares from 2012 on. Now, massive in comparison to what we've been experiencing, but normal in the longer cycle of things.
Yeah, that's correct. So we're at the base of the cycle right now. So we've actually had quite long periods where there have been one or none, no flares. But the cycle is about, from memory, about 11 or 12 years long. So we're at the base of the cycle, and within, maybe we're rising up the cycle. So as you say, by 2012, the activity will go up again. So yeah, and so they will say. I mean, it's always difficult to talk about it because there's many arguments. There's people like Henrik Fensmark, cosmic ray hypothesis, or someone like Stephen Wall would say it's the interplay at the oceans and tropical clouds. And there's a lot of arguments and theories about how it actually does things, how the sun actually changes things. But most people would agree that there is an effect. It's just that we can't explain it yet, and it's all really to do with clouds and how clouds are formed. That's the big unknown.
Okay, so there's lots of different variables and data for people to consider, and after they go to climatereview.net and view your film, they'll have even more lenses to look through. Are you a gambling man?
Only the tiny little flutter. I spent $5 on the horses today at lunch, if that counts.
Already? You're gambling before evening. Wow. Get to meeting James. Okay, what's your prediction? Is humanity going to allow this ridiculous taxation, or are they going to go for it?
Well, that's up to the listeners, really, whether people can, as a body, as the masses, can actually motivate and get informed and find out about it. Because the thing is, our leaders are pretty much for it unanimously. I mean, look at someone like Gordon Brown or Obama or Kevin Rudd over here. They're all gunning for it in a big way, and even the so-called opposition, who should be, a natural saying no. That's what the oppositions are there for, to say no and therefore create a debate. They're not really even creating that debate. So, and then you have people like General Motors, General Electric, Bank of Tokyo, the IMF, the European Union, the whole of the European Union. There's been emissions trading since there in 2005. So if you put it all together, there is a massive vested interest in the powers that be, all those in the Trilateral Commission and all those type of guys and the presidents of America. They all want it. And so unless we do something about it, we will be likely to get it. Fortunately, here in Australia, Kevin Rudd, who's been flying around the world making a massive carbon footprint. He has a team of 500 people in this climate change department for some reason. That's a cost of $90 million a year, and some of their salaries are $300,000 a year for these bureaucrats. He has realized that he's been a big champion of it and flying around the world and, trying to get world kudos for being a champion of this sort of emissions trading. But even he this week had to delay it by another year to 2013 because he realized it may screw up his election chances, bringing in a massive tax like this.
Don't you just love that? Integrity. It's all about integrity.
Well, even the left press, and he's from the left side of politics, have actually been slamming him because he's been saying this is the greatest thing of our time and a great moral imperative. And that's been his slogan, which he got it, funnily enough, his mandate to get into power. And now he's had to back down.
Left, right. It's all one body, right? Left hand, right hand.
Pretty well. It's all part of the same organism. Yeah.
Yeah. Any last words? What would you say to people out there to instill some sort of creative curiosity so they can find out what's going on?
Well, yeah. I guess the thing is, up until relatively recently, and I guess it's 2005 would be the time frame for the Europeans. It really hasn't been a problem. It's just being a sort of a green environmentalist movement shouting relatively on the fringe, and most of us would agree that we should be green if possible. We shouldn't pollute, and I'm totally anti-pollution, and I believe don't get me wrong. If CO2 is a pollutant, I'll be against it, but it isn't. So it hasn't been a problem, but now it is a problem because your electricity prices and your standard of living, your prices are going to go up and your standard of living is going to go down. It's going to really affect you. You're not going to be able to afford that flat screen every other year anymore. So if you want to have your goodies, and you should well have your goodies, and there's no reason why you shouldn't, then you should pay attention.
Okay.
Because they want to take it away, and what they're going to use, the money they're taking away from you, is going to be in some sort of state-controlled redistribution of wealth. So it's going to be a massive taxation that we do not need. It's power taken from you and delivered into the hands of centralized and quite global institutions.
There we go. I think we got to the crux of it right there. Centralized global institutions taking power away. I'll just paraphrase that.
Yes. Well, I mean, I've been trying to avoid saying that because it comes to the sort of the so-called conspiracy theory, which, you know, you got to people just sort of look at you blankly and you say things like that, of a one world government. But it's very hard not to go there as a modus operandi for the whole thing. Yeah. It's very hard not to come to that conclusion. I'm trying not to. But
I know, yeah. Even if it's by design or if it's by accident, the effect of globalization, centralization is still the same. So
it is.
You can look at the effect. And
it is what it is. And the problem is, the governments are not, generally are not that good at redistribution of wealth. I mean, there's certain things you need hospitals, you need police forces, and et cetera, but in general, they're not that good at redistributing wealth. Wealth is better managed by individuals and by companies. I mean, of course, you need regulation and et cetera of these companies, but the system we have going now is quite good. I mean, considering we've done quite well. It gives you know, mankind a tap on the back. It's done quite a good job, and now they're going to totally throw the thing out of whack and turn it to a, dare I say it, a more communist sort of system where the money is once again being controlled by the central powers that be, non-transparently about your say in the matter. I mean, they say, what is it, 70–80% of the laws in Europe now are made by the European Commission, so you have no say in it. So
yeah. Russell just
I'd be worried.
Them out. We've gone, hey, listen, James, we've gone way past worried at this stage. If you'd been speaking to us last year, we'd have been panicking and worried. We're at a different place now. We're like, all right, what do we do? What do we do? I mean,
exactly.
These legislations and statutes and stuff, we're like, yeah, whatever. Away you go. James, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you.
When the full global taxation comes into play or doesn't, we'll get back to you.
Okay.
I think it was 50 euros you put on with me, right? Wasn't it? Was it
50 euros?
Yeah, it was 100 euros you put on.
I'll put 100 euros. I can do that.
Yeah, right.
I don't think I'll have the 100 euros. So it's a win-win for me. You can claim the 100 euros, but I won't have it anymore.
All right. And what time is it right down? No?
It's a very acceptable turning 8 o'clock at night for me.
Okay. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Will do. I think I might have a beer now.
Okay. All right. James Follett, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and all the best with your show. I think you're doing great work and to trying to get the message out there and letting people hear various points of view, which, you know, is not as widely available as it should be, really, in this so-called, you know, democratic culture that we live in. But all the best for it.
Right. Enjoy your beer.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.